Every person who has ever heard of Auschwitz knows the story in one direction. People were forced in. The gates closed behind them. Most never came back out. That is the established shape of the horror. And it is true. But on September 19, 1940, a 39-year-old Polish cavalry officer named Witold Pilecki stood on a street corner in occupied Warsaw and made a decision almost impossible to explain. He did not run. He did not hide. He deliberately stepped into a German street roundup and allowed himself to be arrested so he could be sent to Auschwitz on purpose. He carried a fake identity card. He had a mission. He left behind a wife and 2 children. While the rest of the world was trying to understand Auschwitz from the outside, Pilecki intended to enter it willingly and stay inside for as long as necessary. What he found inside would become the first comprehensive intelligence report on the Nazi concentration camp system ever delivered to the Allied governments. What he built inside would become a secret underground army operating in the most closely watched prison in occupied Europe. What he did to get out would require a level of nerve that exhausts description. And what his own country did to him afterward is the detail that makes this story impossible to put down once you know it. Pilecki does not begin as a soldier in the conventional sense, though he ends up being one of the most consequential figures of the Second World War. He is born on May 13, 1901, in the town of Olenice in what is then the Russian Empire, the descendant of a Polish noble family whose history is already layered with resistance. His ancestors were deported to Russia for participating in an 1863 uprising against Russian rule. The tradition of fighting against occupation, of paying serious prices for political refusal, is not something Pilecki reads about in history books. It is in the structure of his family's biography. He grows up in an era of extraordinary turbulence. Poland regains its independence in 1918 after more than a century of being divided among Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Pilecki fights in the Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1921, which establishes Poland's eastern borders. He becomes a cavalry officer, settles on land in eastern Poland, farms, raises a family, and lives the life of a man who has seen what war costs and understands the value of peace without being naive about how long peace lasts. When Germany invades Poland on September 1, 1939, and the Soviet Union follows from the east 16 days later, Pilecki's world collapses in the way that millions of Polish lives collapse simultaneously. The country ceases to exist as a political entity within weeks. Pilecki immediately joins the underground resistance. He co-founds a secret organization called the Secret Polish Army in November 1939. By the summer of 1940, reports are reaching the resistance in Warsaw that Poles are being arrested and sent to a new German camp in the south of Poland called Auschwitz. Families receiving notifications that their relatives have died there within days or weeks of arrival. Pilecki's organization wants to know what is happening inside. Pilecki presents a plan to his superiors. He will allow himself to be arrested, sent to the camp and report back on conditions. He will also build a resistance network inside. His superiors approve the plan. They give him a false identity document in the name of Tomasz Serafiński. On September 19, 1940, he walks into a German street roundup in Warsaw, is detained along with roughly 2,000 other Polish civilians, and 2 days later is loaded onto a transport to Auschwitz. He arrives at Auschwitz on September 22, 1940. The first thing that happens is a beating. An SS guard knocks out 2 of his teeth because Pilecki is holding his inmate registration number in his hand instead of carrying it in his mouth as instructed. He is assigned number 4859. His head is shaved. He is issued a striped uniform. He is told, through the structure of the camp's daily reality, that his life is worth exactly as much as the Germans decide it is worth on any given day and no more. Food rations are calculated, he will later write in his report, at a level designed to keep a man alive for approximately 6 weeks before his body simply gives out. Pilecki begins working immediately. Not on the labor details, which are brutal and constant, but on something the guards cannot see. He looks at the faces around him. He identifies other members of the Polish underground, men he can trust, men whose backgrounds he can partially verify through careful and extremely dangerous conversation conducted in whispers during the brief margins of the day when direct supervision is fractionally reduced. Within weeks of his arrival, he has the beginning of a network. He names it the Union of Military Organization, and it operates with the patience and precision of a man who understands that being discovered means not only his own death but the execution of every person connected to him. The camp at this stage is brutal, but it is not yet the systematic extermination facility it will become. It is a prison for Polish political opponents and convicted German criminals, and the killing, while constant and casual, has not yet taken on the industrial scale that arrives later. Pilecki witnesses everything with the specific attention of someone whose job is to remember and report. He documents the structure of the camp, the location of buildings and warehouses, the patterns of guard rotation, the methods of punishment, the numbers of people arriving and dying. He writes these things in a code that he has developed and stores the encoded notes in places the guards do not look. Getting the information out requires a parallel operation. The camp occasionally releases prisoners who have served fixed sentences. Pilecki's network identifies these prisoners in advance, memorizes reports, and the released inmates carry the encoded intelligence to the Polish resistance in Warsaw on their bodies, in their clothing, in the lining of the objects they are permitted to take out. From Warsaw, the reports move up the chain of the Polish government in exile in London, which forwards them to British and American intelligence. Poland's chief rabbi will later write in the foreword to the English translation of Pilecki's report that if his early warnings had been heeded, they might have changed the course of history. The world, it turns out, is not ready to believe what Pilecki is sending. By 1942, Auschwitz is changing. The first Jewish transports subjected to immediate selection for the gas chambers begin arriving. Pilecki watches the camp transform from a prison into something for which no existing word is adequate. He gathers intelligence on the gas chambers, on the crematoria, on the selection process, on the numbers. He encodes and transmits what he can. His network by this point numbers in the hundreds, spread through multiple sections of the camp, covering different labor details in different blocks, feeding information upward through a structure careful enough to survive in an environment where denunciation by another prisoner can mean execution for everyone involved. He also builds a secret radio transmitter. This is a fact that deserves a moment of reflection in isolation. Pilecki and members of his network, inside Auschwitz, under constant guard, facing death for the possession of any unauthorized object, assemble a functioning radio transmitter from parts smuggled into the camp piece by piece. They transmit from inside the camp to the Polish resistance outside. The transmissions carry intelligence about the camp's operations. They eventually stop using it when the risk of detection becomes too high, but the fact of its existence, of its construction and operation inside the most controlled environment in occupied Europe, says something about the level of organization Pilecki has built in a place designed to make organization impossible. Through 1941 and 1942, Pilecki's reports reach London. The Polish government in exile presses the British and the Americans to act. The requests are specific: bomb the railway lines leading to the camp, or drop Polish paratroopers inside to support an armed uprising. The British and the Americans receive the reports and the requests and do not act. The Allies, Pilecki's network is eventually told, consider his accounts of systematic mass extermination to be exaggerated. The scale of what he is describing does not fit into the categories that the people receiving his messages are willing to apply to what a government is capable of doing to civilians. They are wrong. Pilecki knows they are wrong. He has been watching it happen. He begins to understand that the only way to make the outside world believe what is happening inside Auschwitz is to escape, go to Warsaw in person, and make the argument face to face. He also understands that escape from Auschwitz is not a theoretical problem. For every prisoner who escapes, the camp administration executes 10 others chosen at random from the escaping prisoners' block. Pilecki has, for this reason, actively discouraged escape attempts by members of his own network. He has watched men selected for execution because someone else ran. He knows exactly what the cost of escape looks like when it is distributed across people who made no decision to run. He prepares the escape for months. 3 men will go together: Pilecki and 2 others from his network, Jan Redzig and Edward Szyszalski. They have identified a route through the bakery where they have been assigned to work, a facility just outside the main camp perimeter. On the night of April 26 going into April 27, 1943, the 3 men cut through a telephone wire to disable an alarm, overcome a guard, and move through the darkness toward the Sola River. They swim across. The water is cold and the current is significant, and all 3 of them make it to the other side. What follows is a 10-day journey through occupied Poland on foot, at night, hiding during the day in farm buildings and forests, moving from safe house to safe house through the resistance network that Pilecki knows by memory, asking strangers to trust them based on code words and the same underground structure he has been part of since 1939. They make it to Warsaw. Pilecki is free. He has been inside Auschwitz for 2 years, 7 months and 4 days. He has survived typhus and pneumonia and starvation and beatings and the daily possibility of being selected for death at the arbitrary convenience of the people running the camp. He weighs less than he did when he arrived. He writes in his account of the escape, with the characteristic understatement that runs through everything he puts on paper, that further stay in the camp might have been too dangerous and difficult for him. He delivers his report. He meets with Polish Home Army commanders in Warsaw. He describes in person what the reports have been describing on paper for nearly 3 years. He argues for an armed uprising inside Auschwitz, coordinated with an attack from outside. The Home Army commanders decline. The Allies, they explain, still do not consider the reports credible enough to authorize the kind of operation Pilecki is proposing. The people Pilecki has left inside the camp will continue to die. The people arriving on the trains will continue to be selected at the ramp. The crematoria will continue to operate. And the man who went in voluntarily and came out with the evidence will be told that the evidence is not enough. He does not stop. This is the part of Pilecki's story that separates it from every other story in the category of remarkable things people did during the war. Another man in this position, having survived what he survived and delivered what he delivered and been told it was insufficient, could be forgiven for concluding that he had done his part. Pilecki does not reach that conclusion. When the Warsaw Uprising begins on August 1, 1944, he enlists as a common soldier without revealing his rank, because officers are in short supply and he does not want to be pulled from the fighting for command duties in the rear. He fights in the streets of Warsaw for the duration of the uprising. When it is suppressed in October 1944, he is interned in a German prisoner of war camp at Murnau in Bavaria, where he survives until liberation by American forces in April 1945. The war in Europe ends in May 1945. Pilecki has now survived the German occupation of Poland, nearly 3 years inside Auschwitz, the Warsaw Uprising and a German POW camp. The reasonable conclusion to this sequence is that he goes home, finds his family and begins whatever comes after. He does not go home yet. He returns to Italy where the Polish II Corps under General Anders is stationed, and he compiles the expanded version of his report on Auschwitz, the document that will eventually be translated into English as the Auschwitz Volunteer, Beyond Bravery. It runs to more than 100 pages. It is the most detailed first-person account of the camp's operations that exists. Then in late 1945 he goes back into Poland. The country is now under Soviet-backed communist control, and the London-based Polish government in exile, which Pilecki still considers the legitimate government of Poland, wants intelligence on what is happening inside the new political order. Pilecki volunteers. He has a wife and 2 children in Poland. He goes back in undercover, makes contact with anti-communist resistance networks and begins reporting. He knows the risk. Before leaving for Poland, he tells people close to him that he expects to be caught and that he expects the communists to execute him. He goes anyway because it is the mission and because he is the kind of person who does the mission. The communist Polish security services arrest Witold Pilecki on May 8, 1947. He is 45 years old. What follows is not a legal proceeding in any meaningful sense. He is held and interrogated for months. He is tortured. He later tells his wife during a brief permitted visit that the techniques used on him during interrogation were worse than anything the Germans did to him inside Auschwitz, which is a sentence that lands with the full weight of what Auschwitz was. He is charged with espionage, illegal border crossing, carrying weapons, and planning to assassinate senior figures in the Polish communist security apparatus. He is not permitted to call defense witnesses. He is not permitted to testify meaningfully on his own behalf. The trial is what the trial is designed to be, a mechanism for producing a predetermined outcome. He is convicted on all charges. On May 25, 1948, Witold Pilecki is taken to Mokoto prison in Warsaw and executed with a single shot to the back of the head. He is 46 years old. The communist government erases his name from Polish historical records. His wartime file is classified and sealed. His family is told almost nothing about the details of his mission or his time in Auschwitz. His children grow up in a country where mentioning their father's name can bring consequences. For decades, the assumption among those who knew anything about him at all is that his contribution to the war effort is a question too politically sensitive to examine. The man who went into Auschwitz voluntarily and came out with the evidence that defined the historical record of the Holocaust is treated by his own country as a traitor. His records remain sealed until the fall of communism in Poland in 1989. The documents begin emerging in the 1990s. Researchers find the reports, the citations, the testimony of the people who worked with him inside the camp, the accounts from the Polish Home Army officers who received his intelligence. His family, still living in Poland, learns for the first time the full shape of what their father and husband had actually done during the war. Pilecki is exonerated posthumously. A street in Warsaw is named after him. A square. A school. A military battalion. The Polish state eventually names him one of the country's greatest national heroes. The book written about him by journalist Jack Fairweather in 2019 wins the Costa Book Award, one of the most prestigious literary prizes in Britain, and introduces his story to an international audience that had never encountered it. The irony at the center of this story is not the kind that resolves itself comfortably. Pilecki went into Auschwitz to gather evidence so that the world would act to stop what was happening. The world received his reports and did not act. He escaped and delivered the evidence in person, and the Home Army commanders declined to authorize the uprising he had organized. The Allies continued to question the credibility of accounts that he had assembled at the cost of nearly 3 years inside a death camp. After the war, the country he had spent his entire adult life trying to protect had him arrested, tortured, and shot, and then spent the next 4 decades pretending he had never existed. He died believing, by his own account, that he had failed. He had wanted to stop something, and the something had not been stopped. The camp he had reported on for years continued to operate until January 1945, when Soviet forces liberated it. Approximately 1.1 million people, the overwhelming majority of them Jewish, were killed at Auschwitz. Pilecki had documented the system while it was being built. He had sent the information through every channel available to him and watched it fail to produce the response he was asking for. What he could not see from inside that failure was what the information was doing in the places it was landing. The reports he smuggled out of Auschwitz between 1940 and 1943 were the first comprehensive eyewitness accounts of the camp's operations to reach the Allied governments. They established, in documented form, what the German state was doing. They became part of the evidentiary foundation of the Nuremberg trials. They informed the historical understanding of the Holocaust in ways that shaped everything that came after. The Poland's chief rabbi was right when he wrote that if the reports had been heeded earlier, they might have changed the course of history. They were not heeded early enough. But they were preserved, and they were used, and they became part of the record of what happened in a way that no subsequent denial could undo. Pilecki went in with a false name and a mission. He came out with the truth about the worst thing the modern world had ever done. His country shot him for it and buried his name for 40 years. Then the name came back, as true things tend to come back, and the man who stepped forward into a Warsaw street roundup on a September morning in 1940 turned out to have been right about everything that mattered, at the cost of everything he had. He is the only person known to have voluntarily entered Auschwitz. He is also the person who proved that the most dangerous thing a man can carry out of a concentration camp is not a weapon or a plan or a map. It is the truth.